I want to take a look at the costs of the war towards the end, and just think about that a little bit, because this is the war itself is the monumental event of this poem. Everything that comes before it is the leading up to it, and then you get the grand battle, and we went over that. All of the fighting, all of the deaths, all of the fighting, all of the deaths, over and over and over. And that is its own thing. But then afterwards, I think it's instructive to look at, well, what happens after that? You know, where do they go from there? Where does the poem go from there? Is it just, you know, and then the last soldier died, the end? That's one way to end something like that, but it's not what happens here. The poem goes on, and I think it's valuable to look and see how the poem recovers from that cataclysm and what it draws as not just lessons, but as methods for interpreting. After all was lost, said Janamejaya, what did Dhritarashtra do? And what did wise Sanjara say to the blind king? Vaishampura said, I will tell you. And notice how we're already emphasizing how many levels of storytelling are going on here. Having lost all who were dearest to him, what could a father of 100 sons do now? What kind of life remained to him, so rich in children only a month before, his line secure, a treasury of sons to keep his memory alive? He now stood destitute, as though they had never lived. He was reduced to a stupor of distress. His blind eyes leaked and dripped like a cracked cistern. His soft hands trembled uncontrollably. Sanjaya was stern. Why do you sit there self-absorbed, weltering in misery? Grief, feeding greedily on itself, never brought anyone any good. Never brought any good. Do something useful. See that all those fathers, husbands, sons, all those kings and followers whose flesh, thanks to you, now mixes with the mud, at least receive the proper funeral rites. Enough self-indulgence. That's interesting. Just look at that in the sequence. That first little bit reminds us that lots of storytelling going on here. But then the poem touches us, quite frankly. That image of Dhritarashtra confronting all the devastation, a devastation of which he has some culpability, is heartbreaking. He was reduced to a stupor of distress. His blind eyes leaked and dripped like a cracked cistern. His soft hands trembled uncontrollably. So vulnerable, so old. They're focusing, they're emphasizing his physical disability and his age, the shaking of the hands. And you feel bad for him. After all that devastation, you feel bad for him. At least I do. But then immediately, Sanjaya, who is his aide, who has been telling him what happened, because he has been given all the divine sight to know everything about the thing, and he is revealing his vision to the blind king. Sanjaya exercises a little tough love. He chooses this moment to get a little rigid. Why do you sit there self-absorbed, weltering in misery? You know, man up, pal. Don't be such a crybaby. Well, from our perspective, we are more with Dhritarashtra at this moment. Again, at least I am. The emotional connection, I think, is very real. And then we're finding ourselves accused of being sentimental, of being self-indulgent by Sanjaya. Is that legitimate? Is that necessary? I feel a little uncertain. Like, well, no, wait a minute. No, what? Is there a human element in there that Sanjaya is missing? Is there a more justified response to everything? Maybe not wallowing like Dhritarashtra. Maybe not absolutely just looking at it and like Sanjaya and wanting to smack the old king around. Maybe there is a middle ground between the lines that we are supposed to figure out. Because this monumental cataclysm of the war requires an individual and personal response. Unfeeling man, you are too severe, moaned Dhritarashtra. I am like a husbandman who has long watched his orchard grow, mature and bear ripe fruit, who now has all his sturdy trees destroyed by lightning and the howling desert wind. Oh, I am like a blasted tree myself, one that in its scanty sap preserves a longing for the green that once played round it. I shall be broken-hearted until death. He claps back at Sanjaya. He defends himself. He does so notably in the form of a simile. I am like a husbandman who has watched his orchard grow. A husbandman is essentially a gardener or a farmer or something like that. So he sees himself automatically in a fake way. He sees himself as a literary device, a simile. And then like the blasted tree, and this is starting to seem a little artificial. It still, however, I would argue, tugs at sympathy. It is arguing for the value of sympathy. Perhaps the value of sympathy as expressed through art. And then he goes more personal. And in addition, I have lost my kingdom. How can you expect me not to grieve? I had the best advice, I took no notice. Now I have paid. A curse on my bad judgment. I must have done great wrong in previous births. I don't remember. I suppose it's fate. Was ever a man more unfortunate? But there you see, as we're reading this, we're starting to pull back from him. He has been holding us close with his internalization of the tragedy, but now he's starting to whine. He's starting to complain. He's starting to blame other things. I must have done a great wrong in previous births. So he's blaming not himself, but himself in earlier incarnations. I don't remember. Gee, has anybody ever used that excuse when they've been caught doing something wrong? I suppose it's fate. I'm a victim. It's not me. Fate has it in for me. So you see, in this conflict between Sanjaya, who's Mr. Tough Love, and Dhritarashtra, who is Mr. Sympathy and Feeling, we were pulled one way to identify with the king, then we're starting to ease back away from him. Maybe not all the way to Drishtaraya, but we're sensing that. Because when we see him start to complain, we're losing sympathy, and we do kind of want to smack him around and say, come on, some of this is on you. Sanjaya was unmoved. Never mind previous. You've had enough shortcomings in this life to explain your woe. When Duryodhana swaggered about in his youthful pride, you offered him encouragement, not sense. You failed to show him the path of principle. Nothing but war would do for that foolish man, seduced by the splendor he had promised you. You were greedy, too avid for gain, blind as you are, unfit for a warrior's life. Perhaps the glamour of war excited you, that glorious ideal. However it was, you were too fond of Duryodhana and loved to please him. You yearned for the kingdom, to belong to the Kauravas alone, and you were blind to Dharma. But now regret is useless. Rather, seek for understanding. So, Sanjaya, his subordinate, his aide, is smacking him around. And he's not accepting this. And he puts it in very personal terms, saying, no, 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 this is on you. No, you have a personal flaw here. You can't blame it on fate, on something beyond you, on something abstract, on something for which you have no responsibility. And again, we're kind of stuck in the middle there and wondering, well, is he responsible? Is he guilty? Or does he have an excuse? Where in the organization of the universe, where in the divine plan of an omnipotent divine realm, where does free will and fault come in? Another advisor, Vidura, younger brother, smart guy. Vidura too exhorted Dhritarashtra to put aside self-pity. We all die. Death seizes us, heroes and cowards both. A man may fight and live, or stay at home and die anyway. Time cannot be cheated. You should not mourn your sons who fell in battle. They all died facing forward. Heaven receives them even without rituals. They are fortunate. Remember, once they did not exist for you. Now again they inhabit a different world. Like clouds, your lives overlapped and parted. They did not belong to you, nor you to them. There is nothing to lament. So, he does not get personal. He puts it in very universal terms. And again, that contrast between the very personal Sanjaya argument and now the very universal argument from Vidura. We're sort of in the middle, and the answer is probably somewhere in between. And we are being called on, we readers are being called on to figure out where those two perspectives meet. Because there is no ultimate answer, at least not one that we can know, but we are obligated to ask the question. And then, significantly, Vidura backs up his point with a story, a poem. And he tells this little story, and it is supposed to convey meaning. And you don't have to read the poem to recognize that, well, now he's just telling a poem. So he's telling a poem within a poem. And the poem is being narrated by this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. And it is one more level of artifice. One more level that needs to be interpreted. One more hint that none of this should be taken at face value, that we should be looking inside and saying, well, what is really going on here? And then after that poem, he tells a story. Because just telling a poem is not enough. The poem, the larger poem, the Mahābhārata, is hammering that point home. That this is all about interpretation. This is all about figuring out for yourself. Not just sitting back passively and saying, oh, that happened and that happened. Oh, okay, now you're going to tell me what it means. Good, I can go home now. No. It is being pointed out again and again and again that we have to invest ourselves in this process of making meaning, making sense out of everything around us. And after the story, Dhritarashtra reacts, "Ah, the poor man," exclaimed Dhritarashtra, "I'd like to rescue him." So he has been swept up into the details of the story. He is identifying very closely with the characters in the story. But Vidura corrects him, saying, "It's just a story," explained Vidura, "an allegory." It's just fake. The real significance is one that you have to see through. The character that the king is so caught up with that he wants to rescue is just a character, and that doesn't really exist. What exists is the symbol, the art. That is something that needs to be picked apart, examined, struggled with, attempted to resolve, and ultimately probably accepted as irresolvable. That process is, well, that process is what art is. And after this enormous battle, this enormous war that everything has been leading up to, this is what the poem is saying. This is the poem saying, none of that really matters. What really matters is what you can get out of it by reading between the lines. Not this guy fighting and that guy fighting and this hero dying and that hero dying. That's all trivia. What matters is what we can do with that. What sense can we make out of it? How can we use this piece of art to help us with our daily lives, to make sense of the world around us? And I just love that the poem has the courage at the end of this mammoth battle that has had so much leading up to it. It has the courage to say, yeah, everything you just slogged through, all of that reading you did, it doesn't really matter. What matters is your ability to think about it. You might have memorized every name. You might have memorized the entire sequence of events. But none of that really matters at all. What matters is how you can use it for yourself.